down, please, comfortably. Don't get tired.
Okay.
That's good. Take a picture of your new teacher.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I would like to begin with by quoting a verse from the Holy Quran, and the first thing I want to say is that science, it is based on scientific method, and scientific method depends on observations with the help of 5 senses: the sense of sight, hearing, touch, feeling, taste, etc. These are the 5 senses. So these 5 senses and the use of the scientific method limits our observation to how we came into existence. The other thing we are left with is faith. For us Muslims, we believe in the Islamic faith and the teachings of the Quran, what they say about the creation of man. But inshallah, what I was tasked was to describe the biological basis of this theory of evolution or variation that we see in organisms. So let me quote the verse first. There are about 13 verses actually, but I would like to quote one in the beginning, and if we shall find time, I'll share with you the rest of them at the end, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. هو الذي خلقكم فمنكم كافر ومنكم مؤمن والله بما تعملون بصير. صدق الله العظيم. Chapter number 64, verse number 2. He is the one who created you, yet amongst you are disbelievers, and amongst you are believers as well, and Allah sees what you do. Okay, now quickly coming to the biological aspect of it. I'll talk about Darwinism later, because there are certain things you need to understand about biology, its genetic basis, and the variation we see among the phenomenon of variation that we observe among living organisms. You can consider this a summary, but not exactly. I'll try to explain these things, because it is difficult to explain, 4-year college in just a few minutes. But in case you find something difficult to understand, you can ask me. The first thing, genetic.
The best thing would be you write down your question. You can ask him later on. Offer him a cup of tea. He's helping you with science, with some ilm, and then you can, while sitting with him, you can easily ask him whatever you don't understand.
The first thing is genetic material. It controls the biological life of a cell or organism. Is understood, right? Sexual reproduction is a source of variation. Variation is based on sexual reproduction. This is important to understand, especially when you are considering Darwinism. There have to be 2 organisms that mate together to produce offspring. Because some people who believe, for example, Archaeopteryx, they say, the evolutionists say that it was actually a reptile, a dinosaur that evolved into a bird. So if it was the first bird, one organism, who did it mate with to produce progeny? This proves that evolution is not possible in this way. There has to be a mate, and science proves it, that sexual reproduction is the source of variation. And what do I mean when I say variation? Variation is based on genetic material, as I said. The genes, I don't know how to explain this, but okay, there is a process in cell division. It's called karyokinesis, the division of the nucleus. chromosomes in certain phase of it, they come close together and they exchange their chromatids, their genetic material. This results in variation. You understand it?
Something new is made. Isn't it so?
Something new, but it is important to understand that its program is already present in the genes. It's not something new that you haven't seen before. For example, a black man, a black person, mates with a white woman. So the combination of it, the progeny that is produced, that would be somewhat between black and white. Man is very tall, the woman is dwarf. The children they produce there would be a certain ratio, we study it in science, 9:3:3:1.
Come please, no problem.
So it would be a combination, it would be a contrast to them. So, do we have a marker? While studying genetics,
You know, this is a good thing. I'm learning, I'm already learning a few things.
in genetics we represent genes. I don't know if you understand genes. But
Genes are same
okay,
simple words.
okay. Simple words. First of all, you have to understand about traits. What are traits? What is the meaning of traits? It means, for example, skin color, height. These things are traits, qualities. Okay. Traits are represented by alleles. These are genes. Alleles. What it means is the variety of these traits. For example, tallness is an allele. The gene for tallness is an allele. The gene for dwarfness, you know dwarfness? The opposite of tallness.
Smallness, shortness.
Okay, so the gene of the allele of tallness is represented with capital T, like this. And of dwarfness is represented by small t. Right? So the progeny that is produced,
The children that are produced, okay, progeny would be children, babies.
the generation of it, of those
You know, like
parents.
kuchi kuchi babies, small kuchi kuchi.
So they would be somewhat medium sized.
Yeah.
Okay? So this tallness, the allele for tallness is present in the parent. For dwarfness is present in the parent. This is not new. This is called genotype. These are representation of genes. We call it genotype. And the physical expression, you understand? Physical expression of this genotype, it's called phenotype. Okay? So the genes are known. They do not change. But the phenotype that is obtained is different from both the parents. It's somewhat a combination. Similarly, consider the example if a plant with red flowers is crossed with a plant with white flowers, the progeny that we obtain would have pink flowers and different shades of pink, different shades between red and white. So the genes do not vary, they do not change. Had they been changed, we would call it evolution. But this is not observed in nature.
They have nothing new is coming.
Yes.
Whatever is from the two.
It is present in the program, the genetic program of the organism. And if there occurs any change, we call it mutation. You may have heard about this term. Mutation. It is defined as a spontaneous change in the genetic makeup of an organism. Apparent reasons for it, for this change is ultraviolet radiations, chemical agents, or errors in cell division. When the chromosomes are separating, if there occur errors, this may result in mutation.
Can you tell them, for example, okay, I can maybe simplified. He is using scientific words. Mutation means, like America threw a bomb on Japan. You may have heard.
Yeah.
Nuclear bomb.
Yes.
The result was, I think, mutated children. You said this is radiation. You said this, something like this?
Yes, ultraviolet.
It will disturb the order of the genes and it will destroy everything. And then something very different will come into being.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes.
It's important to understand this. This is mutation. All the kinds of mutations that are known to us, they do not produce favorable results.
Negative results.
It either results in death of the organism or sterility. It no longer remains fertile. It cannot produce offspring. Don't even think about evolution. It cannot produce offspring. How can that?
It cannot have children. It becomes very weak. I mean, he said mutation means some problems, some weaknesses, some faults.
But it's also important to understand that it's not always destruction, not in all organisms. In human organisms, it is. We are going to, inshallah, if we find time, we are going to talk about microevolution and mega evolution.
Okay, we will find time. If
Inshallah.
not today, then the day after tomorrow. It's very useful, I think.
Because macroevolution, there is no doubt in anyone's mind that, especially the creationists, that macroevolution has never occurred. It cannot occur. But microevolution, again, it's a contradiction in terms, how you want to say it, whether you want to call it variation or you want to call it microevolution. For example, and let me say, I'm not talking about the higher organism. For example, I'm talking about viruses, bacteria. You say when these organisms infect human beings or animals, for example, it affects a human being and he takes antibiotics. After a while, scientists need to prepare another antibiotic. Why? Because these organisms develop resistance. Now, how is that possible if there is no change occurring? Okay, so it's not that, and I will not tell you that Quran speaks against evolution, that evolution does not occur. You have to understand evolution for that purpose. Human evolution, without a doubt, did not occur. Macroevolution, scientists, creationists believe that it did not occur. But microevolution, again, you want to call it microevolution or variation, it's a difference in terms.
Macro means in case of us. Micro means in case of bacteria, virus.
Little changes, small changes.
Small things or small change. Macro is big, micro is small.
Now, talking about viruses, people don't even consider them living organisms. They are a bridge between living and non-living. Okay? Only the reproductive part of their life, they are called living. Otherwise, they are not considered living organisms even. So that's what it is. Okay. So I hope this makes some sense. Bismillah.
His English is good, mashallah.
Yeah.
And it's going above your heads, no?
Yeah.
No, you can always stop me and ask me, no problem. The phenomenon of crossing over in meiosis. Okay, now I have the marker. For example, this is a chromosome.
Marker is finished.
This is another one. Okay. So, in a certain phase of meiosis, these chromatids, this is called a chromatid, one arm. Okay, they join and they exchange. Sometimes they exchange segments. For example, okay, this part was taken from here. This part, okay, this arm took a part of this, and for example, this one took a part of here. This chromosome. Okay. Now, eventually, these will separate. This will pull to get to the right side. This will go to, and new cells will form. Okay. Now some part of it, some part of this chromosome was here, some part of this one was here. So exchange occurred, exchange of genetic material. This is called variation. This is the reason why in this organism some of the T character, some of the small t character and some of the capital T character is present. So it's neither totally tall nor totally dwarf. It is somewhat between, because this is the exchange and mixture of genetic material that this phenomenon is called variation, and a new variety is formed. Okay, variation. The evolutionists believe that variation led to evolution. They say that this is the basis of evolution. Variations are of two types: continuous and discontinuous variations. Continuous variations show a spectrum or range of phenotypes. Example, height. Okay, we just consider the example of height. Color, intelligence. You understand this? We've been studying this. Intelligence. Ape wasn't as intelligent as man is. When man evolved from apes or whatever they say we evolved from, his level of intelligence was very low, and with time this intelligence quotient progressed. He progressed in his intelligence quotients. So this is the very idea of evolution and continuous variations. For example, color is a simple example. There's a pigment in our skin, melatonin, okay, and it's inactive form of it. When sunlight, okay, let me complete. Continuous variations are often affected by environmental factors. Environmental factors, example, sunlight, okay, humidity, these things. And even habitat, whether an animal is living in aquatic habitat, in water, on dry terrestrial environment, arid environment, birds, for example, they fly in air. So these things influence the process of variation. Continuous, okay. For example, yes, skin color. There are pigments in our skin, they're called melatonin. That's the inactive form. Now when sunlight falls on the skin, it activates this melatonin and converts it into melanin. Now, melanin is a pigment that produces darkness in skin color. More the amount of melatonin, in other words, more you are exposed to sunlight, more melatonin gets converted into melanin and darker the skin color. So this is continuous variation, and so we observe different shades in skin color. Some are very dark, some are very white, very fair, pale, and then there are a number of shades in between them. Then a discontinuous variation. These variations show distinct phenotypes and thus can be measured. Example, blood groups A, B, AB, and O. These are the human blood groups. Okay, so these can be measured. Okay, for example, now habitat. Now I want you to think of it from the mind of an evolutionist. For example, an animal, what they suggest is that, for example, fishes, they used to live in aquatic habitat because the earth at that time, they say, was very warm. So the temperature of water was somewhat moderate. So the living organisms were at that time fishes. Now, when the food of the aquatic environment that depleted, now these fishes, those of them that were successful in adapting themselves and going to the terrestrial environment, they evolved into amphibians. Now they can search their food on land as well. So they were, don't understand that? No, I know it doesn't make sense, but this is the idea that evolutionists present.
It's a theory of
Okay, so
That is the uncle dog. Is
So amphibians, these are animals that can that live. Their life cycle is completed both in aquatic environment and terrestrial.
in water. They live in water. Aquatic meaning water.
Okay, they live on the terrestrial environment, but their reproductive phase is completed inside water. Okay, then these amphibians, as I say, evolved into reptiles. Reptiles are animals that can withstand the harsh conditions of dry terrestrial environment. Terrestrial environment, land environment. Okay, then evolved from them birds. They could go looking for food on trees and mountains and these habitats at higher altitudes.
Which are some of the reptiles?
Reptiles, for example, snakes,
They can live in a lot of places.
lizards, desert lizards, these things. Mutations, I've talked about them a little bit. Mutations are an important source of variation, as I talked about viruses and bacteria as well. Microevolution. Okay, let us talk about evolution now. This by no means is detail of this subject. There are a lot of interesting things, but I have to summarize in a way that you can understand. If there is anything you don't understand, please let me know. Evolution. Organic evolution.
What to do if they don't understand anything? It seems to me that he's not understanding anything.
No, you should ask questions. Okay,
Ask
organic.
your teacher,
Organic evolution. Organic evolution means evolution of organisms. Organic evolution is defined as change in the characteristics of a population or species of organisms over the course of generations. Now, it's important to note here that it is the change in the characteristics of a population or species. If you observe a change in one singular organism, this is not evolution. Unless that trait that is developed in an organism, unless it is inheritable, it can be passed on to the progeny, to the children, offspring, and they can contain that trait. That's called evolution. If a single organism develops a character and is not able to reproduce, for example, they tried to mate a horse with a donkey, a male horse with a female donkey. So I think the offspring that is produced is called pony or something like that. So similarly among dogs as well, perhaps they tried this experiment, but the offspring, it was produced, but it was sterile. It wasn't fertile. It couldn't mate. It couldn't reproduce. It cannot give rise to offspring. So this trait cannot be considered inheritable, and this is not evolution. Okay, some history of the evolution. French biologist C.D. Buffon, 1707 to 1788. This is the 18th century. He was the first to hint at evolution. His countryman J.D. Lamarck, 1744 to 1827, that is the mid-18th to mid-19th century, was first to propose a mechanism for evolution. Lamarck. We are taught the theory of Lamarck at school. Lamarck's theory, what did he suggest? His theory was based on 2 points. One, use and misuse of organs. The other, inheritance of acquired characters. These are the 2 steps of evolution according to Lamarck. For example, he presented this example. For example, there were horses that used to graze on land. They used to eat grass, in simple words. They used to eat fodder. That's what they used to feed on. Now, with time, when fodder got depleted, there was no more grass. All the grass that was present was eaten by these organisms. Now, they had to stretch their necks to reach out to the branches of trees and eat the leaves um, if they could reach them. Those of them who were successful, they developed long necks because they used to stretch their necks. And this is what Lamarck suggests how giraffes were evolved. You know giraffes?
Understand his point?
You know giraffes? It's called giraffe.
In Arabic, I think the same. You know, animals with very long necks, very, very long, very big, very tall animals with a neck which is very long.
I have a marker, but it has no.
In Arabic, zarafa they call it. Not zebra. Zebra is like a donkey. A giraffe is very, very long, very tall.
Long neck.
The body is not very tall, but the neck is very long.
2 horns.
So it's colorful, it's not black and white. It has 2 or 3 colors.
So this is what he suggests how giraffes got evolved. Now the use of this organ, they used to stretch their necks, their muscles, the muscles of their necks developed. So did their bones, the vertebrae of their necks, and this is the point he suggested: use and misuse of organs. That the organs that are used more develop, and they take new forms, favorable in accordance with their needs. And the organs that are not used, they become rudimentary, and in the successive generations, they are lost altogether. The second point he suggests: inheritance of acquired character. These are acquired characters. For example, long neck of giraffe. So this character must be inheritable. It is inherited. Unless it is inherited, the cycle is not complete. The evolution is not complete. That organism that developed a certain character will die, and eventually no change will be seen in the offspring. This is not evolution. So 2 points: use and misuse of organs, and second, inheritance of acquired characters. Then comes Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882, that is the 19th century. He proposed the mechanism of organic evolution in 1838. It was called as the theory of natural selection. He didn't call it the theory of evolution. Time is up? Okay. So he called it the theory of natural selection. He didn't use the word the theory of evolution, even though he used the word evolution or evolving in his writings. I have an example, but time is short. Okay. Darwin proposed this theory after his 5-year voyage on the HMS Beagle. That is from 1831 to 1836. He began his first notebook on the transmutation of species. Transmutation, conversion of one species into another. One species taking the form of another. The word form, the term used here, form, is very important, because that's where creationists contradict with evolutionists. An amphibian converting into reptile is a change in form. A virus or a bacterium developing into another kind of bacterium is not a change of form, even though it develops new characteristics, new metabolic faculties. Okay, it is not a change of form, so it is not evolution. Transmutation of species, and it occurs to my mind, Darwin mentioned it in a letter he wrote to his friend, that even I do not believe in evolution. The only reason I propose this is because it helps me to classify organisms and to study embryology, the relationship we'll talk about classification and taxonomy inshallah. Classification of organisms. Okay, and he published his book in 1859 titled The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Okay, the idea behind this, the theme of this theory was survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. Okay, another thing I want you to notice is that when the scientific era began, it wasn't very scientific. The first form, you can say the primary form of science in that era was fiction, basically. A naturalist, we didn't even used to call them scientists. The term used for them was naturalists. They observe nature and they write their observations in the form of literature. Okay? They write essays describing what they saw about nature. So it wasn't a popular way, scientific method wasn't a popular way in that time, that you also have to explain your observations and what you infer from them. You don't have to prove them, you don't have to justify your claims about natural phenomena and things. It was just presented as literature, as things are presented in literature. It has to amuse the readers. That's what the purpose was. That's what we call fiction, not science. And this was the era, the 17th century, and these were the centuries when fiction was more popular and science, allow me to use the word, was evolving. Survival of the fittest was the theme behind this theory of natural selection. The first thing he says, survival and reproduction. That only the organisms who are able to adapt to new conditions, to new challenges, for example, food shortage. Okay. For example, an animal has to stretch his neck, reach up to the branches of the trees. Okay. So, an organism that can survive as well as reproduce, so that these acquired characters, as Lamarck pointed out, can be inherited. Secondly, favorable combination is passed on. I mentioned it already. Favorable combination. The characters that favor the organism to survive the new challenges, the new conditions of whatever habitat it is occupying. The idea of classification is needed to classify organism, as I mentioned. Okay, classification. What is classification? Supposing that organisms had a common ancestry. They say that the first organisms were prokaryotes. They didn't have a definitely bounded nucleus. Evolved from them were eukaryotes. Then came protists. The protists were of two kinds, animal-like protists and plant-like protists. From animal-like protists evolved animals. From plant-like protists evolved plants. And among the animal kingdom, then there were invertebrates. Then they evolved into vertebrates, the organism with a definite vertebral column, as we have backbone. And fishes were the first vertebrates. Then evolved the amphibians and reptiles, birds, and finally mammals. So, considering that they evolved from a common ancestor, they on the basis of similarities and differences, taxonomists tried to, make a flow chart of them. That which organism is more likely to be evolving from which ancestor. As I mentioned to you, the chart. First were the prokaryotes, then eukaryotes, then invertebrates, then vertebrates, then fishes, amphibians. This is called classification. Right? So, on the basis of similarities and differences, it is necessary to classify organisms based on common ancestry. The common ancestry, this idea comes from evolution. Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882, and Alfred Russell, this is a piece of information, important one. Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882, and Alfred Russell Wallace, 1823 to 1913, independently discovered the mechanism of natural selection. Okay, embryology and so-called vestigial organs. These are.
I think this is very hard on my stomach, So, and our time is up also. Okay?
There are only 2 points now. 2 points remain. We have 15 minutes of break, actually. Okay, embryology and vestigial organs. Okay, I'll try to summarize it. Say?
I think you have no problem sitting here for 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
No problem. Thank you. I can complete it. Embryology, for example, because embryologically, a lot of organisms belonging to different classes, whether mammals or birds, reptiles, there are a lot of similarities observed in their embryology. I was watching a documentary and listening to a professor of biology in USA. He said human beings are fishes. We are fish. In embryological stages, there are the digits of a baby, of an embryo, they are webbed. There are webs between them. Before birth, they get degenerated. The webs get degenerated. But in the life of the fetus, the digits are webbed. For example, ducks. Have you seen their feet? They are much like fish. They can swim in water. And the fetus, in the embryo stage, it is in a fluid. It is suspended in a fluid. So they say that, look, this is similar to fish. We used to be fish. This is what their logic is. Similarly, vestigial organs, rudimentary organs that were present at some point in our ancestors, the evolutionists say that, but with time we lost those organs. You remember the Lamarck's theory? Use and misuse of organs, the organs that are not used with time, eventually they will degenerate and the organism will lose those organisms. The species, the population will lose those organs. It is the very concept of vestigial organs. The example they quote from a human being, the anatomy of human being, they quote the example of appendix and of tailbone. Now, appendix, they say there is no physiological function of appendix in human body. It doesn't mean if you haven't, for example, you haven't discovered its physiological function, it doesn't mean there is none. So appendix, it has been discovered that it has a huge role in the life of fetus and young human being, and in adults it is an important part of immune system. It aids the immunological functions of human body. Similarly, tailbone, and it is especially visible in the embryo stage, in the fetus. So what the evolutionists suggest is that this is the remaining part of the tail that our ancestors used to have. Now, in reality, if you analyze it, this is not tailbone. It is actually a vertebra. I don't know how to explain. The building block of spine. Okay? So it's a vertebra and it provides attachment site for tendons and ligaments and muscles. It's not without a function. So this is how this theory of them fails. The last point, an important point, missing links and fossils. Okay, the evolutionists suggest that, for example, there are various, there's a class, mammals, and then there's the primates. There are different forms of these primates. One are, for example, human beings. I don't have a marker, this does not work. For example, this is a class of human beings. This is
Jackson, by the way, I think this is a little bit heavy, even on me. Whatever 5 minutes you need, we give you on Wednesday. And
it is the last point.
Now I remember I have also a class and I have to look at a few pages. Either if you want to continue here, no problem.
No problem.
Okay, those who want to continue.
I think for this man, I think it's difficult.
Okay, no problem. Those who want to continue on there. Okay, so this is another.
All of it?
This is another class of monkeys. This is another class of monkeys.
Now some, yes, please. Ustad Abdul Malik is also calling. So you continue if you want.
Okay.
That's class.
So, who is the common ancestor? These are the different forms and different varieties, but who is the common ancestor? That is missing. That is not known. Among all organisms, whether mammals or birds or reptiles, amphibians, so that is not known. The fossils, what are fossils? These are remains of organisms that are buried under soil for ages. Okay, and when the paleontologists, the scientists who study these fossils, when they dig the ground and find these fossils, they try to compare them, these various fossils of various different organisms, and they try to study the similarities and differences. So the fossils, among those fossils, there is no missing link found. I talked about scientific method. You have to observe it there for 5 senses. We cannot do that. But what evidence do we do have is of fossils. But even the fossils prove that evolution wasn't possible because missing links were not found. And there were also shortcomings in this method of study because among fossils only the hard parts of the organism could be preserved. For example, bones or shells or these things. So this disproves the theory of evolution. But as I said, it's not so that evolution, any form of it wouldn't have occurred. No, microevolution, I mentioned to you about it. Okay, if you're still interested in knowing some more, I've done with the scientific part of it. No more science. However, I mentioned to you that I have I've collected certain verses that I would like to read it to you, and of course you would be happy to listen to them. Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
ولقد علمتم الذين اعتدوا منكم في السبت فقلنا لهم كونوا قردة خاسئين.
Chapter number 2, verse number 65. And indeed, you knew those amongst you who transgressed in the matter of Sabt or Saturday, so we decreed upon them, be monkeys, disgraced, rejected. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
إن مثل عيسى عند الله كمثل آدم خلقه من تراب ثم قال له كن فيكون.
Chapter number 3, verse number 59.
Verily the example of Jesus to God is same as the example of Adam. He created him from dust and then said to him, be, and so he was.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا.
Chapter number 3, verse number 193.
Our Lord, indeed we have heard a caller calling to faith, saying, believe in your Lord, and thus we have believed.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء.
Chapter number 4, verse number 1.
O mankind, fear your Lord who created you from one soul and created from it its mate and dispersed from both of them many men and women.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ صَوَّرْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ. Chapter number 7, verse number 11. And indeed we created you, and then gave you shape, and then commanded the angels, prostrate to Adam. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أَلَا لَهُ الْخَلْقُ وَالْأَمْرُ تَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. Chapter number 7, verse number 54. Let it be clear that His is the creation and the command. Glorified is Allah, Lord of the worlds. As I mentioned to you about mutations, it is a spontaneous change. What does it mean by spontaneous? There is no, you can't identify a certain reason for it. The apparent reasons of it, as I mentioned, was exposure to ultraviolet radiation, chemical agents, etc. But spontaneous means the reason of it is not known. So if I rephrase this translation, I can say that His is the creation and mutation. He can change a thing as well. As we know, He changed human beings, some of the human beings into monkeys, apes. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. سأصرف عن آياتي الذين يتكبرون في الأرض بغير الحق وإن يروا كل آية لا يؤمنوا بها وإن يروا سبيل الرشد لا يتخذوه سبيلا وإن يروا سبيل الغي يتخذوه سبيلا ذلك بأنهم كذبوا بآياتنا وكانوا عنها غافلين. يا شيخ. Chapter number 7, verse number 146. Soon I will turn away from my signs those who are arrogant upon the earth without right. And if they should see every sign, they will still not believe in it. And if they see the way of righteous guidance, they will not adopt it as a way. But if they see the way of erroneous misguidance, they will adopt it as a way. That is because they have denied our signs and were heedless of them. Excuse me. Please silence. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. قل كونوا حجارة أو حديدا أو خلقا مما يكبر في صدوركم فسيقولون من يعيدنا قل الذي فطركم أول مرة. Chapter number 17, verses 50 to 51. Say, be you of stone or iron or of a creation which in your minds is hardest to be raised up from. Yet soon will they say, who will cause us to return? Say, the one who created you the first time. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أَوَلَا يَذْكُرُ الْإِنسَانُ أَنَّا خَلَقْنَاهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَلَمْ يَكُ شَيْئًا. Chapter number 19, verse number 67. Does man not call to mind that we created him before when he was nothing? Right? This goes certainly against the theory of evolution that we were evolved from some organisms that were already present. No, we were created from nothing. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ بَدَأَ الْخَلْقِ. Chapter number 29, verse number 20. Say, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, travel through the land and observe how He began creation. Isn't that exactly what Darwin was trying to do? 5-year voyage. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالِمِينَ. Chapter number 30, verse number 22. And of His signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your languages and your colors. We talked about this. Indeed, in that are signs for those of knowledge. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. ذَلِكَ عَالِمُ الْغَيْبِ وَالشَّهَادَةِ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ الَّذِي أَحْسَنَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقَهُ وَبَدَأَ خَلْقَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ طِينٍ ثُمَّ جَعَلَ نَسْلَهُ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِنْ مَاءٍ مَهِينٍ. Chapter number 32, verses 6 to 8. That is the knower of the unseen and the witnessed, the exalted in might, the merciful, who perfected everything which He created and began the creation of man from clay. Then He made his progeny out of the extract of a disdained liquid. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق أولم يكف بربك أنه على كل شيء شهيد. Chapter number 41, verse number 53. Soon we will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth. But is it not sufficient concerning your Lord that He is witness over all things? Okay? When the Lord is witness over all things, there is not much of evidence needed. There's not much that you are supposed to provide evidence for. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Huwa alladhi khalaqakum faminkum kafirun wa minkum mu'min wallahu bima ta'maluna basir. Chapter number 64, verse number 2. He is the one who created you, yet amongst you are disbelievers and amongst you are believers as well. And Allah sees what you do. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم. صدق الله العظيم. Chapter number 95, verse number 4. We have certainly created man in the best stature. These were the verses that I found were related to the topic, and with this we end. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.